This presentation will provide information for teaching for 7-week success. Some of the information in this presentation was informed by a document called Guidelines for Teaching in Time-Shortened Intensive or Summer School Settings, which can be located at the link below. Teaching for 7-week success comes down to these 3 factors: preparing students to succeed, content considerations, support, and feedback. Let's take a look at each of these in turn. First, preparing students to succeed. This involves several factors, the first of which is communicating clear expectations. Communicating clear expectations makes it easy for students to understand very early in the class exactly what they must do to succeed. This might take the form of a simple list of assignments and due dates, or you might take your syllabus and create an activity that gives information about each of these and have students acknowledge receipt of that and have a discussion about it. Another thing that's important to do in terms of expectations is communicating about communication. Provide guidelines and rules for interaction in the class, such as how students should expect to communicate with you, what your response email policy is, and so on. A common expectation here is that students in a compressed class may want to expect to receive email answers from the instructor within 1 business day. Explain other class policies such as attendance and late penalties for assignments, and so on. Next, explain the challenges of compressed format. A compressed format can be challenging. Students naturally may be worrying about that, and by discussing it and explaining the challenges of the compressed format, not only are you helping students to succeed, you're also acknowledging their very real worries and concerns. For example, students might be concerned about their ability to successfully complete projects or do papers or study for exams in the time-shortened term. Help them understand how they can do this by discussing those time commitments that they will need to deal with. Make sure that they understand that they need to commit themselves to the workload of the class, just like you would any other class. You may also want to discuss the reasons behind the compressed format. For example, focusing on a maximum of 2 classes at a time gives you higher engagement in each class. Share the success that other institutions that have used compressed formats have done. Talk about the summer session, which is usually a compressed format, and so on. Give students some confidence that the compressed format can work for them. Finally, share with them the techniques that you're using to ensure the student's success within that shortened term. Next, identify some potential problem areas. As you consider the class you're teaching, from your experience, or as you gain more experience teaching in a compressed term, you'll become more aware of what causes students the most problems. You may be able to foretell them or predict these. Help students understand what those are and help them develop strategies for dealing with them very early on in the class. Next, in terms of preparing students to succeed, are introductions and quick trust activities. Many instructors like to make sure that they have introductions as part of the beginning of a class anyway. This is especially important in a shortened term class. These introductions help students begin to form as a group, help them identify potential study group members, and so on. Quick trust activities takes us a step further and helps students get to know each other a bit more. It helps them move from introduction into collaboration and trust. There are many team-building activities and introductory activities that you can find in books, professional publications, and via internet searches, and I encourage you to try these. Finally, in preparing students to succeed, it's important to scaffold group projects if you're going to use these. Group projects can be frustrating and difficult in any term. Helping groups form early on, help them to reduce ambiguity to a reasonable level, and if possible, give students a model to follow if it's appropriate. If you're going to be using technology to help facilitate a group project, consider having that same technology introduced in an individual activity or in a smaller scale, smaller group activity before the large group activity, so that students can gain some experience with it and develop some comfort with using that technology before they have to use it for the group project. Next, in Teaching for 7-Week Success are content considerations. We encourage you to do backwards design. Focus on the outcome. As you review your class and make plans for what you're going to do, it's better to start with the end in mind. This is totally backwards from the way that we usually think about the class, but this is why it's called backwards design. First, start off by identifying what your students have to know and have to be able to do. Start there. Then design or choose your assessments that you will have confidence will measure that students actually know what they need to know and can do what they need to do. Then and only then should you identify readings, outline your presentations, and develop learning activities and projects that will help students perform on those assessments, which gives you confidence that they will be able to do what you need them to be able to do and know what you need them to know. Next, strike a careful balance between depth and breadth. Consider that depth to breadth ratio. Of course, in many classes, the expectation is to cover a great deal of material in a minimum depth. In others, it's important to increase the depth of what is learned over a great deal of breadth. Some classes, of course, require both. It's up to you as an instructor to make good choices about when to go broad and when to go deep. By making smart choices here, you'll have some control over the workload as well as the cognitive load that you place on students. The key, of course, is to ensure that your students achieve the actual required outcomes in the class. Next, establish relevance. This goes to motivation. Relevance is a very important component of motivation, and relevance is simply helping students make connections between what students are learning in the course and the real world. Perhaps their real world experiences, perhaps their anticipated need to know the kinds of things that they're learning in a class in a real world career. Some ways you can do this are by sharing stories from the field, from your own personal background, or having students make those connections by investigating how what they're learning works in the real world, in the job market, for example. Finally, under the content considerations factor, individualize where possible. Individualization can be challenging, but it's very rewarding. Individualization doesn't mean you have to have entirely different assignments for different students. Instead, just consider having multiple options for gaining information. For example, create text and audio both where possible. Also, think about having optional forms for expression of learning. For example, on a particular project or assignment, you might give students the option to either write a report, create a poster or infographic, or if time permits, give oral reports in order to demonstrate learning. The third factor that we have is support and feedback. First, technical support. In shorter terms, that consequence of not being able to log in and get email or not being able to log into JetNet and get course content could really be a problem for students. Take some time early on, before the class even starts, to identify potential technical support problems. Then identify technical support solutions. For example, make sure that students know about the Solution Center, where they can go for help with their email and other Jackson-provided accounts and technology. Make sure that you introduce students to the digital inclusion storefront on campus, where they can get low-cost technology. And also, find out about the technical support available from your publisher if you're using any publisher-provided content. Support and feedback also includes a flexibility component. Flexibility is expressed in many ways. While it's important to have due dates, there are times when, as an instructor, you do have the discretion to provide some flexibility to a student. Sometimes this is talked about having really high expectations, but managing that complexity of life. You can provide reasonable accommodations. You might consider allowing a student with a documented need to do a late assignment, maybe with a small grade, a penalty, rather than not accepting any late assignments at all. You might also create or permit some form of alternative assignment in cases where it makes sense in terms of what the student needs to do as well as what the content of the course requires. Support and feedback, and this goes to feedback. Fast response to questions. Of course, it doesn't matter what the term is, students really appreciate fast responses to questions. In shorter term classes, you'll need to be especially proactive about responding to students' questions. This may be in the form of email or in class forums. A recommended policy is to pledge to respond to all student questions in either email or in a student forum in JetNet within 1 business day. Of course, it's easier to create that policy than to follow it. So as an instructor, you really need to focus on developing ways of handling the expected volume of communications in your class. Some ideas that might help you would be to prioritize questions that are preventing students from progressing or are causing lots of frustration. Another idea is to decide on a preferred method for communications. Some instructors really prefer email and check it all the time. Others hate having their inbox cluttered. If you are the former and you prefer email, use that and make sure that you tell students that this is the form of communication that works best for you, face-to-face or an email. Another way is if you don't like email, set up forums in your JetNet shell and tell students that this is where you're going to be checking daily to see if they have questions or need help. Whatever your option, whatever you choose, teach your students about this preference and how to use it properly and appropriately. Make sure they understand your availability and really work hard to meet those kinds of pledges. Again, feedback, fast feedback on assignments, really rapid feedback on assignments, we know helps students learn. You really, especially in terms of assignments that are repeated, so learning about how to do better on assignment 1 would help them do better on assignment 2. So timely feedback is really crucial in the shortened term. Develop a plan that will ensure you have sufficient time to do grading and stick to it. Now, one of the things that we have as a policy here at Jackson is to have standard items graded and returned to students with the grade posted in JetNet within a week. Of course, certain items such as long-form papers and projects take longer, and that's understandable and covered by that policy. When feasible, I recommend that you make use of machine grading within the course management system so students can get immediate feedback on learning checks. I don't recommend this for major course assignments such as final exams, which likely should be done under more close supervision in a face-to-face class, but instead use machine grading of quizzes as learning checks, small number of points, but very rapid feedback that really helps students focus their study, as well as giving them the motivation to study and giving you some information about how effective their study is. Teaching for 7-week success really comes down to how we help students understand what needs to be done, preparing them to succeed in these conditions, using careful content considerations and making wise choices about what we're asking students to do, and then really good support and feedback. If we attend to these things, we can make sure we're teaching for student success. As always, if you need any help with any of these things or just want to talk about some ideas, I'd be happy to do that.